So in today's session, we are going to discuss about data binding. So what exactly the data binding and what it indicates, how many ways of data bindings that we have in Lightning Web Component, and how can we implement one-way binding, how to implement two-way binding, both we'll see with the practical use cases. Now, so first of all, we have to understand what exactly the data binding now. Let me explain the practical concept. Now, so now as of now, we have concentrated on designing part. That means how can we design a Lightning Web component by placing the various visible appearance controls, like some text boxes, checkboxes, buttons, tabs, card components, like that various components we have used to design the user interface. Now we are placing this text boxes on the Lightning component, and then we are able to perform some actions by using some button controls. Now tell me, after entering the data inside this text boxes or checkboxes or pick list controls, anything, once I click on this submit button, the data should be going to whom? To the client side controller. This is the client side controller that will be called as JavaScript file. JavaScript file. So now here in this JavaScript file, we need to pass this whole data. Then how can we pass these values? Whatever the details that have entered, like as customer code, customer name, and then contact number, email ID, and then website name, how to pass this data back to that JavaScript code. Now how the JavaScript will receive these values and how it will store inside the variables. And then it will be doing some operations over here. Once operations has been done, it will send the response back to that user interface. Okay, this is the process we used to do. In the front end, just we can able to enter some data in the text boxes, and after that, as soon as once you click on the button control, the request will be sending to the client side controller. Because as of now, we have concentrated only on the designing part, but we haven't implemented any controller part by using JavaScript. So now we are going to be implementing this JavaScript code. We are implementing client side controller. That already we know in Lightning framework, it may be ARA, it may be LWC also. Upon click on the button control on the component, the request will go to the client side controller, not to the server side controller. It can't invoke the Apex class code directly. It will be invoking the JavaScript code. Then JavaScript code will internally invoke your Apex programming code. So now here in this case, after entering the data in the text boxes, as soon as once you click on this button, the request will go to the client side controller, and then the client side controller will do the required operations, and then we can say it will be sending the response back to the user interface. Now, so in this case here, how can we send the data from your front end, that means designing part to controller part, and how can we get the data from JavaScript to the controller here? For that one, we are using the help of a feature called as data binding. Binding the data. That means we can pass the data, we can store the data. Now, so now here in this case, how can we bind the data here? So now how to pass the data from okay your user interface to JavaScript controller, and how can we get the result from JavaScript controller to user interface? So for that reason, we are using the help of data binding feature. Now, in this case, as part of this data binding, we have two types of data binding features are available in Lightning Web Component. First one-way binding. Second one, two-way binding. Okay, we have one-way binding. Second one, two-way binding over here. Then what is one-way binding? What is two-way binding? Now let me explain. Now, let me explain what exactly the one-way binding. Now, for example, I have user interface. This is the designing part. That means template file. This is the JavaScript file. That means controller file. I have these two files are available. This is the template file. This is the controller file. That means the JavaScript file. Now, so now here in this case, let's see what do you mean by this one way. For example, in this JavaScript file, you will be having, I have defined some variables. Like where customer code. I'm giving some value like 56009032. This is the customer code. Where customer name. I'm passing the value some ready labs. Where balance amount. I'm giving the value some 34 lakhs. Where city name. I'm giving the value some Hyderabad. Where contact number. I'm passing the value. Like that here, I'm defining some variables here. Now, I'm defining some variables in my JavaScript file. So, whatever the variables we are going to define inside this JavaScript file, these variables are called as properties. These are called as the JavaScript properties. Whatever the variables we are defining inside your JavaScript file, that means controller file, these variables are called as the JavaScript properties in Lightning Web Component. Okay. Now, so now here in this case, what I want to do, whatever the variables that you have defined inside this JavaScript file, these variable values we can able to show on your template file. So that means on the user interface. Whatever the values that we have entered, whatever the variables we have defined inside my JavaScript file, these variable values I can show on my template file. That means on the user defined file. So now here in this case, whenever if you want to access the JavaScript properties onto your designing part, then it will be called as one-way binding. One-way means what here? Just we can get the data from the JavaScript properties and we can represent on your template file over here. This is called as one-way binding here. Okay, understood the concept now? Next. Now in this case, As part of this one-way binding, whatever the values that you have entered inside this JavaScript file, we can access these values into your template file. This is called as one-way binding. This is called as one-way binding. This is called as one-way binding. So as part of this one-way binding, just we can able to fetch the data from the JavaScript properties, and those values we can represent on our Lightning Web Component variable you want. This is the first way. Second one here. Okay, one more. The second mechanism, what exactly the two-way binding? Now let me explain. For example, I'm having a template file. I'm having a template file. In this template file, we are entering some data here. Like enter first number, enter second number, operation result. Now I'm placing few text boxes also. I'm placing few text boxes. I'm placing the buttons like addition and the multiply. Two buttons are available. Addition and the multiply. So now two buttons are available. Now I'm entering some data in these text boxes. In the first number text box, I'm giving the value 35,000. In the second number value, we are giving the value some 9,500. I have given some value. So now after entering the data in these text boxes, as soon as once we click on this addition button, what needs to be done? We need to perform the addition operation here. Where we can do that, inside the designing part, we can't do that operations manually here. We need to implement that functionality by using JavaScript. So whatever the operations you want to do on the input values, those operations we need to implement inside your JavaScript. So in this case here, we need to define a JavaScript file that means client-side controller over here. In this client-side controller, we can able to collect the values. Whatever the value we have entered, now to store this first number value, I'm defining some properties. Where first number value, where second number value. Now, after that, I'm going to be collecting the value. Where result equals to, I want to indicate f number plus second number. Just I'm giving the basic code here. How to do that, we'll see practically one by one. Now we are going to doing the calculation. That means what? As soon as once you click on this addition button, now it will collect this request over here, collect the data. This data will be passing to the JavaScript file, that means control file. Then it will do the operations on these input values. Once the operations has been done, the result will be sending back to that user interface here. That means to the template file. So in this case, what happened? We are having a complete round trip. We can send the request, we can get the response here. Not only one way, two way we are going to be implementing. We can pass the input, we can get the output here. So in that case, we can go with the help of two-way binding here. Upon click on this button control, we can invoke some actions. Those actions will collect the values. We can do the required calculations inside your JavaScript file, and then we can send the response back to that user interface. So we can collect this value from the JavaScript, we can represent on your Lightning Web Component. So in this case here, as part of your Lightning Web Component, these are the two types of data bindings are available. Basically, data binding is a feature which is used to collect the JavaScript property values, and we can represent on your Lightning Web Component. Okay, whatever the JavaScript property values that we have, we need to collect the data, we need to show on the Lightning Web Component. As of now, we are representing some hard-coded content. Now, I would like to collect some data from the database. I want to query some records. Those records I want to show on my Lightning Web Component. I want to collect one record details. I want to show on my Lightning Component. I want to collect some other data from the database. I want to show on my stream. So in that case, whenever if you want to get the data from the JavaScript properties and representing on your Lightning Web Component, then we can go with the help of data binding feature. Now, as part of this data binding in Lightning Web Component, we have two types of data bindings are available. First one, one-way binding. Second one, two-way binding here. So one-way binding means what here? Just we can define some JavaScript properties and we can collect the values, and those values we can represent onto your template file. That means on the user interface. So whenever we are getting the JavaScript property values onto your Lightning Web Component, then it is called as one-way binding. But in some cases, I will enter some input values over here for my Lightning Web Component. These input values I would like to collect. I want to pass this input value to my JavaScript controller, which will perform certain operations on these input values. It will generate some result. The result I want to show on my Lightning Web Component. So we are having a complete round trip. We can send the request. We can get the response back from that client-side controller. This process is called as two-way binding. Okay. Clear? Now, so now here in this case, as part of this two-way binding, we have to use the help of a feature called as events. We have to use the help of events. By using these events only, we can able to invoke some actions. So based on that actions, we can perform the operation and we can represent the result on that Lightning Web Component. Okay. Now, then how can we implement this one-way binding? Okay, we'll see with the practical use case. Now, let me explain the one-way binding concept here. Concept is very, very simple. So now, as of now, you know Apex programming. Okay. Now, I'm defining a variable. I'm defining a class. I'm defining a class. Public class, some customer details, a customer helper. I'm defining a class. In this class, I'm defining few variables. Public, integer, customer code, and the customer age. public string, customer name, and the contact number. Public decimal, balance amount. Like that, we can define okay multiple variables also inside your Apex class. Okay, this is Apex class. We have defined this Apex class, which contains some collection of variables inside that. Clear up to this one? Yes, you know this concept here. Once the class has been defined with the required variables, how to access this class variables and how to show on the debug log file? We need to create object because these are normal variables. These are not static numbers. Okay, now these are the normal variables. In order to access those variables, create the object of the class. How to create the object of the class? What is the syntax? Class name, okay, right? Customer helper, some C helper object name equals to new class name, right? Now, this is the object creation. We are creating the object of the class. Through the object, we can access each and every class member. How can we access the class member? Object name dot member name here. That means C helper dot customer code. I'm assigning some value. C helper dot. We can able to assign the value. We can retrieve the values, also print the values, whatever you want. Now here I would like to print the values. System dot debug. Customer code is C helper dot customer code. Next. System dot debug. Customer name is C helper dot customer name. System dot debug. Balance amount is C helper dot balance amount. Like that, we need to access the values. So it's a simple functionality that as part of Apex programming. So now here what we did as part of Apex programming, we have defined an Apex class. This is Apex class we have prepared. In this Apex class, we have defined some set of variables, some integer variables, string variables, decimal variables. You can define a number of variables also of different types. We can define the variables here. In these variables, whatever the values are available, we can access the values by using the help of object. Because if it is a static number, we can able to access directly just with the help of variable name, that means class name dot member name. But this is nothing but a normal variable here. So we can access them by using object of the class. So create the object of the class. We can access every member by using object name dot member name. So we can access this by using C helper dot customer code, C helper dot customer name, C helper dot balance amount. Like that, every member we can able to access like this. Okay, it's a normal class as part of your Apex program. So now let's see. So this is the concept of our normal Apex programming. In Apex programming, we are defining our own Apex class. Inside the class, we can define the members. Those members we can access with the help of an object. So create the object of the class. We can access each and every member by using object name that member. Now, the same thing, how can we do in JavaScript in Lightning Web Components? In Lightning Web Components, how can we access it? Let's see. Now we are having JavaScript file. It is having the extension .js. That means controller file. Controller file. So now here in this controller file also, here for example. Now in this JavaScript file, it is preparing a class. It is preparing a class. Now export default class, whatever the component name that we have given, with that name it will prepare a JavaScript class also. Like for example, sample component extends lightning element. It is preparing a JavaScript class. Whenever I'm creating a lightning web component by giving the name sample component, so now here in that case, it will be preparing 3 files for you by default. Like the first one, a template file, second one, a controller file, third one, a metadata file. This is the controller file class name. So now controller file contains what? A JavaScript class. Now this is the name of the class. Whatever the name that you are given for the component, with the same name it is preparing the class. Now the class will be getting prepared with the keywords export, default, class name, extends, lightning element. So now here in this case here, so now inside this class, we can define your own JavaScript variable. Like whatever the way we are defining the variables in our Fx class, similar fashion we can define JavaScript properties. That means variables. Like I'm defining the variables here, where customer code, I'm assigning some value, where customer name, I'm assigning the value, some Ram Kumar, where balance amount, where email address, ram.kumar@gmail.com, where phone number. These are the variables here. So now tell me in this case, whenever we are defining some variables in the JavaScript, specifying this where is mandatory or optional? Optional. That already we have discussed. We no need to use this keyword where. So now directly we can able to use a variable, because that already told you JavaScript is not a tightly coupled programming, it's a loosely coupled programming. So variable definition is not mandatory. Directly we can use a variable here. So directly I'm using the variable to by assigning some value. Customer code equals to some value, customer name equals to some value, balance amount some value, email address some value, phone number some value. So directly we have assigned some values without any variable definition. So now in this case, whatever the variables that we have defined inside this JavaScript class, so now these variables, whatever the variables we have defined inside this JavaScript class, these variables will be called as JavaScript properties. These are called as JavaScript properties. These are called as JavaScript properties. Each and every variable which we have defined inside of a JavaScript class, these variables will be called as JavaScript properties. Now, then how can we access this JavaScript property values on my Lightning Web component here? How can we access them? So in order to access these properties, just we have to follow the syntax here. If you want to access this JavaScript properties here, access the JavaScript properties from Lightning Web component. How can we access? Just we can specify the curly braces. In the curly braces, we can specify the property name. That's it. No C colon, no V colon, V dot, nothing. Now we can specify just the JavaScript property name. Over. Nothing else. Simple concept here. Just you can go to your JavaScript class, define the required properties and assign the values, and then access the properties from the Lightning Web component by using the syntax, just the curly braces, give the JavaScript property name. Now, suppose for example, I want to access these values, I want to show on my Lightning Web component, just you can specify. Go to the template file. In the template file, you will be having the tag. What is the tag over here? Template tag. By template. Here we can able to show that way property names, like customer code is, what is the property name here? Customer code. I'm giving a break tag to print the next content in the next line. Customer name. Customer name is customer name. Balance amount is balance amount. Email address is email address. That's it. Like that here, we can able to access each and every JavaScript property onto your Lightning Web component. That's a simple concept. Okay. Now here, when coming to the Lightning Web component, so we have to go to your JavaScript file and then prepare the JavaScript properties. Whatever the properties you have defined, whatever the values are available, those values we can show on your Lightning Web component by using the syntax. So that in this case here, once the properties has been defined, those properties we are accessing onto my Lightning Web component. This is called as one way or two way. We are getting the data from where to where? JavaScript to Lightning Web component. This is called as one way. This is called as one way binding here. One way binding means what? Just we can able to define certain JavaScript properties inside your class, JavaScript class, and whatever the variables that we have defined, those variable values we can access into your Lightning Web component by using the curly braces. So that means we're following the syntax. Okay, if you're collecting the data from the JavaScript to your Lightning Web Component, then it is called as one-way binding. Then how to implement two-way binding, that we'll see next. Okay, first of all, if you understood this one, then two-way binding will be very, very easy. For that one, we need the concept of, okay, HTML events. Those are also called as the browser events. We have to pass the data from your Lightning component to JavaScript. Then JavaScript, it will do the operations. We can get the data from JavaScript to Lightning Web Component. For that one, we need the concept of events. That we'll see the concept also. Okay, both one-way, two-way binding, both are important. Understood the concept now? Next, make a note of this one. Data binding feature. Data binding feature allows us to bind the data between between the Lightning Web Component and the controller files. Controller files. Now, Lightning Web Component provides the below two types of data binding. It provides the below two types of data binding. First one-way binding. Second one, two-way binding. One-way binding means what? Two-way binding means what? Here, now let's see. One-way binding. In this approach, we can define the required properties, that means properties, that is variables, inside the JavaScript file, and we can access these properties from the Lightning Web Component and represent on the screen. JavaScript file to Lightning Web Component.